Will everyone please join me in Gasho and repeat the number 2 with me. Namo Amida Butsu.
Namo Amida Butsu.
Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Good morning, everyone. Forgive me if I seem a little tired today. This past Friday and Saturday, I was at an all-day Aikido seminar. So for those of you who, how many of you know what Aikido is? I expect Ms. Sugano to know, because Ms. Sugano goes to the same Aikido dojo that I go to. But I actually would like to talk a little bit about, today for my Dharma talk, about Aikido and actually how that sort of relates to my Buddhist life. So for those of you who don't know what Aikido is a Japanese martial art that was developed by Morihei Ueshiba. Can you all say that name? Morihei Ueshiba. Ueshiba. Ue meaning up. So it's a hard name. But that being said, probably, and again, not that I want to use this example version of Aikido in his movies, which they're fun to watch, but we shouldn't use that as an example. We think of beating the opponent, right? We think of kind of smashing them to the ground, or of like defeating them in combat and winning, right? But in Aikido, the first lesson you learn is how to fall down, how to properly take what's called ukemi, to receive, okay? So, when I'm thrown, I can fall in a way that won't hurt me. But then also at the same time, the person who throws me is not trying to hurt me either. Okay, so Aikido is a martial art that does its best to not cause harm to the other person. Because in reality, one of the main things that Morihei Ueshiba, the founder of Aikido, said is that your opponent is actually not your opponent. Not to think of the person who is attacking you as an adversary or as an enemy who needs to be just defeated, right? And in this, I think this is very Buddhist logic to me. So one of the biggest myths that humankind has created is that there is ultimately a defining and infinite difference between me and you, right? Not just pointing to one person, to all of us, right? That I am ultimately, right? I am different or distinguishedly different from the other person. Now, that being said, this isn't saying that you're all not special or that you're not unique. All of you are special, all of you are unique, and you are individuals in your own way. And at the same time, despite the physical differences between all of us, and the things that, we are, and the things that, could perhaps separate us, like our clothes, our facial hair, like maybe even the kind of car that we drive, we are still human beings who breathe the same air, who have to eat in order to live, and that we have to, and all of us have desires to feel loved and to feel wanted and to feel respected. Defeat people like that. Now, in regards to this, right, I had a wonderful time going to this Aikido seminar because it tested me to my physical limitations. The first day on Friday was a 2-hour class, which in itself is not what I'm usually used to. Usually I train for just about an hour and maybe 15 minutes, right? And that's wonderful. But Saturday was the ultimate challenge because it was a 5-hour seminar class. And if you can imagine being tossed around and thrown, getting your arm locked, getting wrist joints, all those things, right? It's quite taxing. But at the same time, it felt rewarding. And one of the wonderful things about Aikido that I think that no other martial art has captured yet is that through our training and through the martial things that we do to each other, we still developed and fostered a sense of community, a sense of friendship, and a sense of oneness, especially when it's time to throw the other person. We did some pretty scary looking throws. Like if I were to show you on a video like some of the throws that we did, I guarantee you a lot of you would go, because like there's one where you actually throw a person from their head like locked here, and you throw it down like this, and the person has to flip over and take the fall. But ultimately, we were respectful of everyone's level. You know, no one tried to cause, again, right, the whole objective of Aikido is not to cause harm to the person. So this is a martial art that I've been doing now since 2007. I started my journey at college in UC Santa Cruz, and I've always tried to keep up this practice since. And in this time, right, I have to remember that while this is a martial art, right, there are definitely martial aspects to Aikido, where where we do throw a person, or we try not to get hurt if a person attacks us, right? But at the same time, Ueshiba Sensei, the founder of Aikido, did his ultimate best to create a martial art that was not meant to brutally or critically harm a person. And he did this actually by changing a martial art that he was already a master at, called Aiki Jiu-Jitsu, or Jiu-Jitsu, right? And in the original form of Japanese Jiu-Jitsu, your target was to actually cripple or even kill your opponent, right? And to Ueshiba Sensei, his ideology was that this kind of attitude, this type of martial training, does not foster a world of peace. Now, for the Dharma school students, especially many of you who are older now and getting ready to go off to college, you will be met in life with many challenges. You will be met in life with many obstacles. Some of those obstacles are even people. There will be people who may even try to hinder your success, right? And do their best to keep you down while they pop themselves up. Now, of course, our natural reaction to this is to fight back, right? Is to counterattack, right? Like there's that word, counterattack. But if I could ask you to put your Buddhist glasses on, or Buddhist hats on for a moment, and do your best to empathize with that person. Do your best to see the fact that they are trying to hurt you in the first place or keep you down in that way comes from their own suffering and pain. Now, of course, this doesn't mean that you take it, right, or that you let bad things happen to you, but at the same time, maybe there is another way to resolve conflict without directly attacking another person. Part of Aikido and part of Buddhism is actually resolving this type of conflict of what we as humans, do as competition or as, defeating people in life. If we go through life looking at people as possible obstacles or people that can only help us or people that can, we can benefit from, we lead a very sad and selfish life. This is the problem with us as unenlightened beings, is usually when we meet a person or when we meet people, or make new friends, sometimes we calculate in our heads. Is this person a benefit to my life in a way that, will either financially help me or a way that will, make me feel good about myself, right? Am I really making friends with a person who has, sadly, a not very good sense of self and will give me all the attention I deserve while I can profit off of that? Or do we think of people as, oh, this person's an enemy. This person is definitely going to try to keep me down. This person is going to hinder my life, right? If we only think in these two binary terms, there is a problem. There is our view is very, very one-sided, black and white. And if the Buddha taught us anything, it is not to view life this way. So for many of you, when you leave home and you meet new people, try not to think of them as, is this going to boost me or is this going to keep me down? Every human being is complicated. Every human being has a story. Every human being has their own baggage. Every human being has their sense of self. And all of that is to be respected. As is your story, as is your sense of self, is to be respected. If someone is disrespecting you for who you are, or how you look, or even what, or for what you do, right? Before attacking back, right, it is right to stand up for yourself, but ask yourselves, right, where is this coming from? This is why I love Aikido so much, because it resolves conflict without a lot of injury. And isn't that what the goal of Buddhism is when we have conflict? Isn't that the goal of Buddhism when you meet someone who you may not like? I can tell you now, I have this problem as well. I meet many people in life that I'm like, oh, I wish I didn't have to deal with this person. I meet many people in life where I go, ugh, this person, this person doesn't make me feel good about myself. But that is also my Gombu self. That is my sense of arrogance. And I fully admit this. But with that in mind, that is why I also continue to practice the martial art of Aikido. Because instead of bashing back the person and trying to smash them to the floor, the whole point is to see the perspective from the person who I would call my opponent and gently bring them to the floor without any injury. There are people who criticize Aikido, the martial art, and say it's not realistic. It won't win in a street fight. But that's not the point of the martial art in altogether. My point of Aikido is not to win a fight. It's that I don't have to fight. It's that I can do my best not to get into a fight. Yes, there are martial aspects of Aikido that could help me in a pinch. But ultimately, the martial art teaches me that there is a better way to resolve conflict without killing the other person, without hurting the other person, without destroying the other person. Buddhism teaches us this as well. Let us remember that in this particular world that we live in now, and especially with all of our young minds who are here with us in the type of environment that they are living in right now, here in our country, here in our city, across Washington, across the whole country, right? There is a lot of unrest. There is a lot of fighting. And when you turn on the TV, all you see is people arguing with each other now. The whole point now, sadly, of what you seem to see on television, or what becomes normal for all of you, is the person trying to defeat the other person. Person arguing and saying, my point is the right way of thinking, your point is stupid, right? This is not a way to create a harmonious society. Now, of course, again, this doesn't mean that I support legislation or culture that harms other people, right? If there is such thing, right, I would of course speak out against that. And there are things right now that actually are doing that. And I, of course, am vehemently opposed to them. But without getting too political, and especially for our Dharma school students, I ask all of you this. When you go out in life and you start making your decisions, please try your best to have the Buddha Dharma in mind. This doesn't mean being a doormat and being passive and letting people walk all over you, but it does mean being able to to actually stand your ground while not trying to destroy the other person as well. The last image I'd like to put into your mind is the picture of a rock with flowing water coming around it. This idea, right, of are we the rock or are we the water? Aikido is very much, can be like both, actually. Because in order to maintain and to conduct a technique properly, you do have to have a strong foundation. But at the same time, you cannot be rigid in your viewpoints and in your understanding of things. Because if you are, you're going to get left behind. And this is where Aikido is like water. Water can adapt. Water can go around. Water is not limited by limitations to a large point. Water still gets through. Water can still go around the immovable object. And the toughest challenge for the Dharma school students is being both the rock and the water at the same time, thinking that they are two diametrically opposed things. So there's a little Buddhist riddle in your head right now. And with this in mind, I would like to once again remind the Dharma school students that Nembutsu is part of our lives as well. Namo Amida Butsu is receiving that endless stream of love and compassion in your life. And as low as you may feel sometimes in those hard times of hardship, know that Namo Amida Butsu is still working for your benefit. Not to make you rich, not to make you more friends, not to get to date the person you want to date, right? It's to give you your sense of love and compassion, so you love and care for yourself. Please join me in Gassho. And repeat the Nembutsu with me. Namo Amida Butsu. 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 As I reflect, I find that our attainment of Shinji arises the heart and mind with which Amida Tathagata selected the vow, and that the clarification of true mind has been taught for us through the skillful words of compassion of the great sage, the Buddha. But the monks and laity of this latter age and the religious teachers of these times are floundering in concepts of self-nature and mind only, and it despairs the true realization of enlightenment in the Pure Land way, or lost in the self-powered attitude of meditative and non-meditative practices. They are ignorant of the true Shinji, which is Dharma-like. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida. Namo Amida. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Sensei. So today, for our Dharma talk, I'd actually like to talk about a very Jodo Shinshu, like, you know, what is our sect of Buddhism, right? Jodo Shinshu Buddhism, you know, and there are so many wonderful schools of Buddhism out there. You know, you have the Plum Village by Thich Nhat Hanh, you have Vajrayana Buddhism, like the Dalai Lama. You have many wonderful schools of Buddhism, many wonderful schools, and I do not disparage any of these schools. They are all wonderful. I think Dogen is great. I think some of the greatest riddles of our life and the greatest minds that are, you know, that have graced us are the Zen minds of people like Shunryu Suzuki. All of these teachers and teachings are wonderful, and I, you know, thoroughly respect them. Today, though, I would also like to talk about what makes Jodo Shinshu so wonderful. Why come to a Jodo Shinshu temple when like a person could go to a Zen center, or they could go to a Vajrayana center? First off, I would like to address the fact that every Buddhist school has something, I think, that may cater to a need that the person is looking for, right? So, that's thing number one. I think all of these different schools exist so that people can, depending on which school they subscribe to or which school that they choose to cherish, right, can actually go there to fulfill that need. And this isn't to say that I think everybody in this room here, should only believe in one thing, right? Or, I'm also, as the priest here, I'm not telling you, believe, you have to do what I say and believe what I say, right? But today I would like to talk to you about why I chose to be a Jodo Shinshu priest, right? Because I could be teaching Zen teachings, I could be teaching the teachings of the Dalai Lama, again, saying that they are wonderful teachings. But why do I love Jodo Shinshu so much? Why was this the school of Buddhism that I was, that I chose to ordain in, right? Now, just to give you a little bit of context, in Japan, sadly, many people are ordained in the school that their families belong to. And I say sadly because Japan is still a very patriarchal society, with all the respect to Japan. Right? I love Japan. And they have a very patriarchal system where if your father was a Zen monk, then you become a Zen monk. If your father was part of the Nichiren school of Buddhism, it was your duty to become a priest of the Nichiren school of Buddhism. You were basically born into the circumstance that you were, that your parents were. Same thing. If your father was a Jodo Shinshu priest, then you would become a Jodo Shinshu priest. Right? I am very fortunate that this was not thrust upon me. So if anything, it's entirely possible that if I were born into this circumstance, that I would actively oppose or try to resist becoming a Jodo Shinshu priest. When I went to seminary school, Chuo Bukkyo Gakuin, or the seminary school in Japan, people, one of the first questions that I was asked, especially as an American, was, was your father a Jodo Shinshu priest? And I said, no. And they looked at me going like, well, then why are you here? Like, if your father wasn't doing this, why are you even here? And then I told them because I want to be. And sometimes I got kind of a funny look at them too. They're like, what, you want to be a priest? Like, why? You could make so much more money being a businessman or, I don't know, like doing something else, right? And I would always respond, it's not about the money, it's the teachings are something that I thoroughly value. One of the biggest teachings of Jodo Shinshu is Shinji. S-H-I-N-J-I-N, Shinji. And sadly this word has a lot of baggage, but it's been often translated in English as faith. Okay? Now I understand that this word may be problematic for some, because faith can be, or even is, a very Christian-like word. The reason for that, though, is because the English language comes from a lot of Christian background and has its own set of, baggage. But if the word faith is actually not so good to hear, another translation of Shinji is entrusting heart. Entrusting heart. I affirm my entrusting heart to Amida Buddha's wisdom and compassion. That's essentially what Namo Amida Butsu means. Okay? But why do I bring this up? I would still like to continue talking about general Buddhist concepts like interdependence and impermanence, right? Things that we sort of know now that the Buddha taught. But the Buddha also taught a sense of entrusting, right? Now, this is where this gets a little bit different, okay? While one may think of faith or entrusting heart or this word, right, as this dogmatic phrase of, I'm reading from this book, therefore you have to believe what this book says, right? That's kind of what we're sort of operating on the modality of. That because I say, as the minister I say this, or because Shakyamuni Buddha said this, right? Therefore it has to be real and it has to be true. But the Buddha did not teach this way, okay? if anything, the Buddha was a very experiential teacher. The Buddha did not say, you have to blindly believe what I say or else something bad's going to happen to you. The Buddha taught karma of cause and effect, right? The natural law of things. So, you know, if we, for example, let's talk science. If you eat junk food for your entire lives, is your body going to be healthy? No, right? You know, that's a fact. So, you know, if I eat donuts every day, and then I go to the doctor, and the doctor tells me, I have a problem with your blood work, and your levels aren't looking too good, right? That's part of what this reality is, okay? We also, I mean, this goes way deeper than just our physical health and our, beyond our physical health and the superficial appearances of our lives as well. This goes into a spiritual crisis as well. One of the things that the Buddha did, right, when he started his journey was he noticed that people were succumbing to this fear of impermanence, right? There was this fear, or this, not fear, but this active fighting against impermanence. And while impermanence itself is reality. So there's a picture, the third picture on the wall here, where you see Prince Siddhartha on a horse. And he rode out from the palace. He left the palace of luxury, and he saw, well, the first three things that he saw were the inevitabilities that all of us are going to face in life. He first saw an old person. That's change, right? But then he also saw a person who was deathly ill. That is our vulnerability. And then he saw a person who had passed away. All of these things, as scary as they can be, are a sense of reality, is reality itself within our lives. And this isn't to depress you. This isn't to say, life is meaningless, we're all going to die, we should just give up. But this is where Shinji comes into play, in my personal opinion here. This is where Shinji comes into our equation. Now, while Shinji can be translated as faith or a trusting heart, I also see Shinji as an aspect of living life without a sense of fear. Living life to the fullest without a sense of dread. It is ultimate reality that we could die at the very next moment. The Buddha said that, the breath that you take right now could be your very last. But this wasn't to invoke fear into his followers. This was to invoke a sense of settlement, of reality. This, if we can truly if we can truly accept the reality as it was stated by the Buddha, then we can actually live a life without this sense of dread and fear. When parents, this actually might even be more difficult, because when you have children, and by the way, I'm now somewhat included in this equation as I am expected to have a baby next March, right? We want to do everything in our power to protect our children from the harsh realities of the world. We want to do everything in our power to make sure that our children are safe. But the reality is, and I say, talk to me again when my child is a 2-year-old, but the reality is that our children grow up, and our children will eventually, leave the house, leave the nest. And we should want that. With this in mind, right, the reason why Shinran and Shakyamuni Buddha taught the whole concept of Shinji was to ask us to continue to look at ourselves, was to continue to ask ourselves to continuously introspect, to self-check, right? We don't have our entrusting heart in these teachings because we're told that we're supposed to. We have this entrusting and this love of our teachings because they actually make sense to us and fit our sense of reality. And when we continue to live our life in that way, we can live our lives way more authentically and realistically, and without this sense of dread. You know, some of you may have gone to some of those various No Kings protests that have been happening. One of the funniest things that I've noticed about a lot of this, especially like when it comes to Portland, a lot of you know that I am a supervising minister to the Oregon Buddhist Temple, was that we were being fed all these, you know, I want to call them untruths about Portland being this war zone and this chaotic, you know, this chaotic place of dystopia, right? Where like kind of, the way that some people were describing it, I was thinking, oh my gosh, like when I go to Portland, it's going to be just like Mad Max Beyond the Thunderdome or something. Like, I'm sorry, I'm dating myself a little bit with the Mad Max thing, but still, right? You know, we're going to see this type of thing. But you know what I saw instead? With all these, you know, soldiers who are coming to these various places, I see the protesters dressed up as Super Mario characters. I see these protesters dressed up as frogs. I see these protesters dressed up in these funny costumes, and instead of being violent with those, you know, with the soldiers, which is like, sometimes I think that's what they want. It's like they want to fight. And the wonderful thing about this is that they're not giving it to them. They're just holding signs, honking little horns, you know, riding around rollerblades. Remember in my previous talk I was talking about Aikido and the whole point of resolving a conflict without causing damage to the other person? That's part of this. But you know what's even better is that they still, you know, these people still went out and spoke their minds and, you know, definitely held their situation with their convictions, but with a sense of humor as well. Sometimes I think that also can be like a form or sort of like an equivalent to Shinji, right? Again, I'm not saying go out and be, you know, be like, you know, destructive or disruptive or, you know, not take your own safety into account. But at the same time, if we always live our lives with this sense of dread and fear, right, this is where Namo Amida Butsu comes in. And of course, going back to the spiritual side of things in Jodo Shinji Buddhism, one of the biggest questions and the biggest, you know, biggest spiritual turmoils that we are faced with on a day in and day out basis since the beginning of time was what happens after we die. And it was no accident, and I totally planned this with us chanting the beginning of the Amida Sutra. You know, we chanted the first part of Amida Sutra today. Why is this? This is because in the story of the Amida Sutra, Shakyamuni Buddha actually spontaneously speaks to Shariputra, his disciple. Now, usually in the sutras or in the discourse of the Buddha, somebody asks the Buddha a question, right? And the Buddha responds with the answer. But in this particular one, it's one of the rarer sutras where the Buddha spontaneously speaks and speaks directly to one of his disciples. Why is this? One of the theories or one of the legends that my good friend Reverend Ashma Lama said was because that Shariputra passed away before the Buddha did. Shariputra was a very devoted disciple of the historical Buddha, and was actually one of the first disciples who passed away before Shakyamuni Buddha did. And so, with this in mind, the Buddha looks at Shariputra and possibly sensed that he did not have long for this world, and so told him the sutra of Amida's Pure Land, where we all are born into after we die. And again, this is not like a Sandals resort or like a Christian heaven, right? But it is a place of comfort and ultimate awakening. And then Shakyamuni Buddha told Shariputra, this is where you will go when you die. This is where you will go when you come to the end of your life here on this world. And I can only imagine that it gave Shariputra a deep sense of comfort, a deep sense of living life without fear, whatever time he had left. So this is also where Namo Amida Butsu comes into play. This is why I love Jodo Shinju Buddhism so much. All that we do, or our only practice, is placing our hands together and saying Namo Amida Butsu. Many of us come to Buddhism because we want to try out certain rituals like meditation or chanting or reciting mantras and things like that because we think it's going to make us a more calm and a more spiritually enlightened person in this life. And that's fine, right? Many Buddhist schools will give that to you. But one of the things that I love about Jodo Shinshu is that the acceptance and the love of who you are is already there. You don't have to do strong and sundry ritual practices in order to earn the benefit of wisdom and compassion and to be born in the Pure Land. And once that is fully accepted and realized, once we have that trust, that is when we put our hands together and say Namo Amida Butsu. I'm not saying Namo Amida Butsu because I'm not saying that the more times you say Namo Amida Butsu, the closer you're getting to the Pure Land. That's not what we're teaching either. Namo Amida Butsu, if anything, is more of a reaction to that teaching of infinite wisdom and compassion. So this is why we should not think of Buddhism as the stepping stool or as this thing that we do in order to get better, right? When we come through the doors of the temple and when we come to the presence of Amida Buddha, we are already accepted as we are, imperfections and all. And yes, we are imperfect, including myself. With this in mind, I would like to thank all of you for attending today's service. And in closing, will you please join me in Gassho. As I reflect, I find that our attainment of Shinji arises from the heart and mind with which Amida Tathagata selected the vow, and that the clarification of the true mind has been taught for us through the skillful works of compassion of the great sage, the Buddha. For the monks and laity of this latter age and the religious teachers of these times are floundering in concepts of self-nature and mind only, and they disparage the true realization of enlightenment in the Pure Land way, or lost in the self-power attitude of meditative and non-meditative practices. They are ignorant of true Shinji, which is diamond-like. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu.